Welcome to Thoughts on Tech, powered by Eastern Communications. This series aims to raise awareness and promote inclusivity in ICT here in the Philippines.
How we can balance innovation and regulation. We need to ensure that emerging technologies are safe to use, from deployment, design to implementation.
Security is not a one-time thing that you implement or you put into place. It's a constantly evolving thing. The best practice is always keep on improving, keep on finding the loopholes.
During the pandemic, a lot of the things that really worry the overall business is that what's going to happen to our brick and mortar internet cafes, right? One of the things that we did see through technology is our ability to continuously still have these tournaments, but on an online platform.
Gone are the days that cybersecurity is only for big enterprises. Those who can't afford, let's make them affordable, and we're giving them the opportunity to protect themselves as well.
My name is Dani Laurel, and I'm thrilled to be your host in this unique podcast series. Welcome to Thoughts on Tech, powered by Eastern Communications. I'm your host, Dani Laurel, and I am thrilled to be your companion in this unique podcast series. Now, in this series, we aim to raise awareness on ICT inclusivity here in the Philippines. With over 45 million active users in the Philippines alone, esports is no doubt gaining ground as a very established and still growing field in the space of technology. And we have with us today in our podcast none other than the pioneer turned market leader Mineski, represented by Jamie Paraso, who is, of course, the global president for product and brand. Welcome to the podcast, Jamie.
Hi, Danny. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having us.
I'm so excited to have you here to pick your brains on an industry that I'm so curious about, okay? Esports, gaming. I admittedly am not a gamer myself, but I have two young sons, ages 9 and 10.
Right.
And as you can imagine, they're digital natives. This is all they talk about all day. But let's take a step back and discuss Mineski, because I was doing a lot of research on your company. Such an interesting story. Give our viewers here, our listeners, a taste of how that journey came about.
Sure. And it's quite interesting only because you started off talking about your kids, right? The reason being is because Mineski Global was actually started by, my boss, the CEO and founder, Ronald Robbins, back when he was still in university.
Okay.
Right? So it started off alongside Dark Eviag, who's one of the co-founders. It started off as an esports team that played primarily Dota.
Okay.
Right? Back then.
I know that.
Early 2000s.
That's our generation, Dota.
Dota All-Stars, right? So back then, it was the premier, if you would call it, esports game that was being played.
Right.
So from, playing against other universities and other teams, they went on to start winning both at the local, national, and then eventually to a regional, then even at a global.
Got it.
Entering the likes of World Cyber Games and the like, amazing stuff. So eventually these guys, coming from a university that was very business driven, decided right across the street, why don't we try together?
We make money out of what we love.
Absolutely. Fueled by passion, but at the same time, fueled out of necessity. They needed a place to be able to train.
Interesting.
They needed a place to be able to sharpen their skills. So what better way than to actually put up their very own brick and mortar internet cafe? So back then, and myself, which is like yourself, we come from a generation when MG or Mineski Global wasn't Mineski Global yet. It was Mineski Grounds.
Okay.
The very first branch was in along Taft Avenue in Manila, right across the sun. It was part and parcel, an internet cafe where you could actually do work. But at the same time, it was also a place for esports athletes could practice, could play, and do all these things, right? Then from there, as an overall business, like all businessmen, eventually we had to pivot. Only because we started mounting these smaller tournaments within the Mineski cafes, within that culture, within that very grassroots culture that we had. We started working with different publishers, right? The publishers of Dota, the publishers of Mobile Legends, Mantoon, Riot. So one of the things we started to do was, hey, you know what? Since we are in the know of the industry, we actually know how to mount tournaments. Why not go into AAA scale events? Yes.
Interesting.
So we went really from end to end. It wasn't just about us, curating and creating teams. It eventually became us mounting these AAA.
Natural transition as well, especially with the booming technology that we've seen in our lifetime, no? From, like you mentioned, sharing a space in an internet cafe to completely mobile phones being able to do the same things basically nowadays, no? So shifting gears on that, how much money there can be made, right? With this, I mean, like you mentioned, we were talking off cam. It was started by people just wanting to have fun. And then after a while, as you mentioned, the founders of Mineski were like, well, we need to monetize on something that we love so much. Give us an idea of the actual industry and how viable it is as a business model.
Right.
People are making money out of gaming.
Right.
It's no longer, like you mentioned, it's no longer playing the game anymore, but like your part of your job is mounting events now, bringing people together.
Right.
Give us more of an understanding of how big of the in terms of an industry,
right.
the business.
No, I think the beauty of the industry nowadays is that it has been so digitally attuned that you have multiple ways to scale this business.
Right.
You know, when I was much younger, you know, I was telling the team earlier that it was very, very uncommon for SMEs to just scale at the way businesses grow nowadays, right? I mean, now the market is flush with a lot of these SMEs, you know, putting together businesses in their very own foothold, providing their very own various services, products, and what have you, right?
Right.
Maybe due to connectivity, maybe due to a lot of information.
Here, you can do it from home.
Absolutely. And I was telling the guys earlier that, you know, some of these guys, you know, are multi-millionaires, very, very different from how it used to be. And I guess that's primarily due to access of information. You know, information connectivity has really leveled the playing field. Now you have access to information, not just locally, but at a global level.
Okay.
And with that, I feel it empowers those people who have a lot of passion behind something they truly believe in, which was esports back in the day. Is it profitable? I'd like to say it created an entire industry on its own, right? As something that we've been doing for the past 20 years, we also had to evolve, right? So we wanted to be able to cater to different types of platforms where games have been played. So little by little, we started to also, in our own right, start to develop our own in-house capacity to produce these games as well.
Amazing. So you have Filipinos developing games as well.
Around up
part of your...
Everything from ideation, concept creation to actual execution. So yeah.
Okay, so again, from a team, an esports team, towards brick and mortar, right? Towards investing in events, and which are actually online events, towards developing the game itself. Okay, so the whole ecosystem.
Yes.
How else can you be inclusive, especially when there's such a big, let's say, digital divide between different geographical areas in the Philippines? You know, some have access to internet,
right.
Some have difficulty. And even the socioeconomic backgrounds. Is it expensive to game? Is it is it specific people can afford these sort of games, or is it becoming more and more inclusive, so to speak? Everyone has access to the
right. So I mean, again, you know, in the earlier years, I mean, our business of the internet cafe started us wanting to be able to level the playing field by having and providing access to the grassroots communities for cheaper alternatives for computer, because owning a family computer back then was so expensive.
Yeah,
right?
And your own internet connection.
Absolutely. I mean, not everybody had, you know, internet connectivity. So Mineski Infinity was founded on that as well, being able to provide that and extend that to the greater community.
True.
Now, one of the things that we start to see, definitely, I mean, our mobile devices have become the great equalizer. I mean, at this day and age, so as long as you have data, the barrier of entry has actually been lowered as well. You know, it allows for people to connect online. So I think that's how it's evolved. That's how it's changed. And that the beauty of that changing, growing landscape is that it creates more and more, not just gamers, right? But it builds on a bigger community for the whole gaming industry as a whole.
And you say, of course, your title is global. Now, give us an idea about what that means. I know you're present in different countries. Help us understand a bit more what the Filipino team is doing and versus the other Southeast Asia.
Headquarters is, of course, here in the Philippines, but we have a very strong foothold in Indonesia, Malaysia, of course, we have an office in Singapore, Vietnam, Thailand.
That's great.
And we're in the process of opening up in the UAE. So I think, from a regional perspective, it is something that we are very much excited to continuously bolster on our globality as an overall organization.
That's super interesting, actually. Mineski is such a success story, especially for SMEs aspiring to go global. Like from literally a sports team into a global business. Technology had so much to do with that. Clearly, you invested a lot in ICT infrastructure.
Right.
Give us an idea of how SMEs that are aspiring to become global as well can go on the same path.
Right. So thanks, Annie. I mean, when we started, we had to be very, very creative. When I say creative, there was very, very little resources to go around, right? So from our end, it was about figuring out what was the most intrinsic thing that we needed to ensure that we can grow from local all the way to regional. So one of the things that we invested on, especially during the pandemic, actually, was communications.
Okay.
So within our Mineski ecosystem internally, we actually use the LARC platform, right? This allows us to be able to cross-country as well as across region, talk to our regional counterparts and actually continue with BAU or business as usual. It was very, very pivotal and powerful, especially during the pandemic, whereby even our internal procedures for procurement, finance, and all of that were done through that entire platform. It allowed a very systematic way and very inexpensive way for us to actually bootstrap and just be a little bit more attuned, right? As one cohesive big business. Because again, as you grow and scale as a business, right? One of the things you wanted to be able to do is ensure operational excellence is still there.
What's interesting is you've changed with the changing time, and not a lot of companies have been able to do that. Give us an idea of how you make decisions in terms of, let's leave this business, let's leave the brick and mortar shops, which were doing really, really well pre-pandemic, I imagine, and now it's a different era, and let's start something new. I mean, that's a huge risk to take. What advice can you give to SMEs when they're faced with this dilemma and how to make decisions and pivot?
Thank you for that question, Danny. So, I think, I'll refer back to our founder, my boss, the CEO, Ronald. During the pandemic, a lot of the things that really worried the overall business is that what's going to happen to our brick and mortar internet cafes, right? Definitely, it was a very tough and challenging time for the business, and definitely we had to pivot. One of the things that we did see through technology is our ability to continuously still have these tournaments, but on an online platform, whereby we fully utilize our existing capacity and capabilities within the Mineski infrastructure to broadcast these tournaments and still have these tournaments go live.
Okay.
Teams would still compete, things were broadcasted. We would still work with brand partners and sponsors to
How difficult was that? Is that difficult to mount right away, or it would take, learning curve?
Definitely. I like all things. I think during the pandemic, it was unprecedented times, right?
Right.
Yeah. There is nobody who knew that the pandemic was going to happen, nor did anybody knew how to properly navigate. But what we did do was quickly pivot and see, what do we have infrastructurally? We're good at computers, we're good at technology, we can do broadcast, we can still have these tournaments happen. Check. Right? Okay. Second fold, how do we still ensure that these are, how do we still stay attuned and work with the publisher network, with the different brand sponsors that we work with, create advertising within the entire ecosystem? Check, right? Third, how do we still get consumers involved, end users involved, right? Through fan base? Check. Community building? Check. So within just that particular line item, we were actually able to pivot.
Sounds so easy. It must have been some way.
It was definitely difficult. It was definitely difficult. A lot of learning curves. But again, during this time, what fueled us was passion.
Yeah.
For a lot of SMEs, as
want to continue on.
You want to just keep moving forward. You want to be able to pivot. But more importantly, when you go back and peel back, shucks, this is something I'm really passionate about. Then it will come out. So one other thing that we actually developed during the pandemic was, in lieu of our brick and mortar bigger AAA events, is that we created this thing called the GG truck.
Right.
The GG truck are these mobile trucks that we have, which are ready to deploy within GMA, NCR, and even within the Visman region, which actually brings gaming events
to the people.
Exactly. Barangay level, national level.
These are existing right now.
Yes, existing. And we work with different partners, different telco partners, different communication partners, and different FMCG partners, actually. Right?
Mobile na talaga.
Yes, absolutely.
Café, I have got wheels.
Absolutely. We took that entire infrastructure, we repackaged it, and we actually brought it to the consumers.
And you do say, I mean, this all, I suppose, was catapulted by the pandemic, right? And of course, you're a technology company, so you're always on the forefront of innovation. But then this type of innovation was unprecedented. And this is speed that came forward now. Supposedly, we're in a post-pandemic era.
Right.
Things are, quote-unquote, back to normal. There's hybridization. Has that changed the ways in which you use technology compared to pre-pandemic, during pandemic? Are you still using the same sort of, products?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. I think what we did do was we took a lot of what worked and continued to use them. And for what didn't work, we optimized, right? So definitely we do see, a lot more, face-to-face ways of working as compared to during the pandemic.
Did you ever go back to the way it was before, or?
Well, I think now it's very much blended, right? Because now...
that's how it's going to be.
Yep. I mean,
that's how
the industry, the market, and even end users and end consumers, right? Now, when we plan an event, it's no longer just a brick and mortar, nor is it just digital, but it's actually both.
Okay.
So it's about marrying that entire ecosystem and making sure from a connectivity standpoint, we are covering all bases, right? From a technology standpoint, we are seeing two and two what platforms make sense for our target market. Similarly, for brand sponsors that we work with and even the publisher network that we work with, what actually would be very specific and key media mileages that make sense to them to be able to reach your target audience. So there's a lot of that actually happens. So whenever we put together that end-to-end campaign or even that particular tournament, there's a lot of emphasis in being able to ideate alongside each and every stakeholder, ensuring that we are, really doing it properly.
I mean, supposedly during your growth period, and especially the pandemic, you were quite a big company already, right? So you did have some revenues already. What's your advice to those with very limited resources, just starting out? We want to digitalize SMEs, right? We want to be able to allow them to harness technology to grow.
Correct.
But there's really a lack of resources, and it's very expensive to invest in all of these, like you mentioned, communication, that technology fueled. What's the low-hanging fruit that they can do right now to, let's say, what's one thing that they can use to jumpstart, super catapult their growth?
Right. So I think one of the key things that has worked for us is not being necessarily scared to try. I think you go online right now, whether it's communications or whether it's an operational or even a sales tool that you have, right, to monitor and track the progress of how many deals you are actually closing, let alone campaigns running or what have you. I mean, you have various choices. And again, I think digitally is
You mean free tools online?
Some are paid.
Yes,
paid. There are some
that are affordable.
Right? And it's just about peeling back to the core of your business. What actually makes sense for, say, your business? A logistics business would be very, very different and would have very different pain points and need states versus, say, a tech business. But at the end of the day, in terms of being able to actively create that system which works for you, we can be very creative about it nowadays. You have a lot of very cheap alternatives online, let alone learning, from what has actually been done in the past.
What is the biggest opportunity you see here for SMEs in the Philippines when it comes to technology?
So because the Philippines is still, I'd like to think, an emerging market, there's still a lot of untapped opportunities. It's about figuring out what and how better to serve end users and end consumers. I always say this, that, we are in the business of entertainment and still we are in the business of service, right? And the big pillar of what we do is service at the end of the day. How do we serve better the end users and consumers? But at the same time, how do we serve our publishing partners or publisher partners as well as brand partners to ensure we bridge the gap between end users and them, right?
Right.
So I feel that for entrepreneurs, it's about figuring out how do I better serve end users, my target markets, given, say, a particular business I look to grow and scale? There's a lot of emphasis in service only because during the pandemic, we forgot what service was all about.
True.
Everything was automated, sure. Made things easier, sure, right? I think having that very healthy blend of being efficient and being very service-oriented could be something unique that they can work on. Because we've come to learn that it's one thing to have a good product, but it's another thing to be able to have a good product with actual value. Because it goes back to passion. When you produce something out of passion, when you produce something that is of value, you now have that intrinsic flow of followers, you have that intrinsic flow of fans or advocates that time and time again go back to you.
There you have it. As you know, as long as you focus on what's driving the passion,
Right.
and are cognizant of what your customers want, what your clients want, and then you get to harness technology to that.
Definitely. It's
field.
a lot of inroads of what we do actually, although again, leverage on technology, leverage on communications, is us being able to actually create something a little bit bigger than just Mineski. You know, I think at the end of the day, what we want to be able to do and create is, level the playing field for everybody, create a more inclusive community when it comes to esports, gaming, and the overall entertainment industry, right? Utilizing technology, utilizing communications to be able to cut across different target markets, SECs, demographics, and really just go from hardcore gamer all the way to casual gamer, talk about different publisher titles, work with different publisher titles, work and integrate different brands that we work with on a daily, I think that's what we look to be able to do, all the while creating value each and every step of the way.
Exciting times. Well, hopefully we'll be seeing more of you then, and especially the developing part, the development part of the apps is something super exciting with all the talent that we have here. So your company giving birth to even more smaller companies, as you mentioned, in a casual way, and of course going global. Do you have plans to expand? You mentioned
Yes. So again, trajectory-wise, we're we're the strong foot. We have a very strong foothold in Southeast Asia, but we are looking to go all the way to the Middle East as well. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we go all the way to the West as well. So,
right. Watching out of that. Then, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.
And that was, of course, Jamie Paraso, Mineski's Global President for Product and Brand.